Welcome to the Hummel Studios and the Journos. I'm Peter Martin. Hugh MacDonald and Michael Grant are here with me in the studio. Delighted to have your company. And don't forget, you can hit the subscribe button on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel and come and join the football family. There's lots to talk about on the programme, and if you want to engage with us, you can in the comments section as well. And later on, we'll give you details of a fabulous Hummel competition if you've got a boys or girls team who's looking for a full squad kit. That's to come a little later. This programme, the majority of it dedicated to Scottish football, an SFA summit with all 42 clubs coming up in September, and how we solve that big conundrum, which is, can we get more good, talented Scottish players playing regular football, not only down south in the Premier League and across Europe, but in our own domestic leagues as well? How do we improve the quality and the technical ability of them and the overall style, which hopefully would benefit our clubs when they are entering European competitions? So there you are. It's one of those $64,000 questions. And the good news is two of the most intelligent journalists in Scotland are working away at the moment. We're going to try and persevere with Michael and Hugh. On that, it's unusual for you to be on the right wing, Michael. I know you're unhappy about it, but we've given you the Hans Heelhouse role, cutting on your left
foot. It's the Gordon Parks role I'm worried about.
Absolutely. It's a tough one, this, because, you know, as well as looking at the qualifiers for Champions League, for Europa League and Conference League, which have been dismal, poor, the performances at times over the last 20 odd years, we've got to try and rectify this problem. Think Tank 1 and Think Tank 2 didn't, Hugh, and what do you think is going to be achieved by this summit?
Probably very little, and that's. I'm sorry to be so cynical about it, and I really don't mean to, because I think certain of the participants will go in with good faith. But I think the roadblocks to progress are so severe and so difficult to overcome. And the basic one is the grassroots level. Which has got a myriad of problems. But the second one is clubs' unwillingness to play kids. You know, there is just that, and we've been through it a million times. They'll buy a League Two player rather than play a 17-year-old, and we know the reasons for it. So I'm glad it's happening, because stuff will get aired, but am I expecting a radical revolution in Scottish football? No.
It goes back to something that I quote on a regular basis. Far be it for me to be viewed as a Trekkie in Star Trek, but the needs of the many should outweigh the needs of the few. But unfortunately, that is the ethos of Scottish football.
Yeah, and the few have the power, really, don't they, and the resources. I agree with you. I think fundamentally, Craig Mulholland, the new chief football officer at the SFA, has got his work cut out here. You know, I think the time is right for again. I don't think anything new is going to come out of this. We know the issues, and we know the roadblocks, and we know, or we suspect, that not much will come out of this. But I do welcome the fact that they're having this summit, and it's just keeping this debate going, because we've just had a pretty lamentable World Cup. Great to be there, but we didn't show up. Didn't add anything to it. And we're midway through, you'd say, the kind of annual cycle of European results that are not great. You know, we've had Hibs losing in Kosovo. Thankfully, they turned it round. Hearts battered by Benfica. Okay, it's Benfica, but still. They were also battered by Sturm Graz. Rangers are touch and go, whether they'll get through against the Polish team. Celtic come in against Last Glance next week. So, you know, we're in the annual cycle of, you know, underwhelming results. What we saw 2 years ago, I thought the SFA came out with that transition report, didn't they?
Which was good.
Which was good. And I thought there was two things that were good about it. One was the cooperation agreements to kind of free up loans. I think that's been pretty well received.
That gives young players a chance to play with men.
Exactly. So a guy that's out on loan can still come back. Say he's at Rangers, he goes to play at Raith Rovers during the week. He can still come back and be on the bench or play for Rangers. So there's a bit more freedom that, and I think that's been well received. But the other thing I liked about the report, not that it's had any impact, to be honest, is that they said they tried to appeal to the financial motivations of clubs. They said, if you bring in your youth players, it's not going to harm your team. and also it's going to lower your wage bills, and also it could make transfer money for you in the future. So they were clever in the way they tried to pitch it.
Absolutely.
By saying it's the finances that matter to clubs, and this is what we're trying to appeal to. But it hasn't changed anything.
No, and there are so many layers to this, which I presume you could get fans who watch their kids who are climbing that ladder. You've then got chief executives who also have another agenda, or a chairman or an owner, on how the finances are conducted at their club, which is very much a self-interest, as we know only too well over the last 4 or 5 years from COVID onwards. And then there's also the commercial aspect of this, which is quite simply, you can have 42 clubs there, but the 2 or 3 who dictate to the SPFL about that deal with any of the broadcasters, which is BBC, Premier Sports, TNT, any of these, Sky, the main one, they've had their fingers burnt before by selling off the crown jewels to one, and then they go bust, and then they go cap in hand, please save your game to Sky. But when you are in that negotiation, Michael, for me personally, they're selling it on the basis of the only interest that Sky have are derby matches which are full, primarily Celtic and Rangers, and they want 4 of them. And also, there's the argument which I think Neil Doncaster, I'm not preempting what his stance on it, but I think this is, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work it out, is quite simply Neil Doncaster says, no, the 12-team structure works. Because once we get to April and you see the fantastic battle for the top 6, the battle at the bottom and the battle at the top, it works and everybody's quids in. Now that doesn't work. That long-term view of 12 teams for me is a negative towards the way people play football. Because as I said to you guys many times, and last season and the season before and all the way back, when you have 8 teams with 8 managers starting the season saying we have to avoid relegation, that structure's wrong. It breeds negative football.
Yeah, I don't know if you're getting into league reconstruction there, but
it is. It's solely something that allows people. If I have Derek McInnes in here, which I've had, if I've had Stephen Robinson sitting in this tier, David Martindale, if I've had them in here and they say, yeah, you're telling me to play kids. Stephen Robinson said to you, I'll play 3 kids. He says, see if I lose 3 games, they want me sacked. Because that's where we're living now.
That is true. And we know Scottish football, we think we do anyway. It's a pretty favourish environment. You're already seeing Rangers, Derek McInnes, pressure on Derek McInnes. It was ranking up until the weekend at Hearts, was, he hasn't won a game yet. So it is an insanely intense and you accelerate towards crisis point at 100 mile an hour in Scottish football. That's why I think the SFA need to appeal to the chairman and the owners to say, look, and to go back to that financial point and say, it's not going to cost you money in the long run. We've costed this, and if you get your youth development right, you bring through players that can fund your annual academy costs. Like my team Aberdeen, it's about £2 million a year, and there have been times when I thought, is this worth it? Because you're not seeing it in first team minutes, and you're not seeing it in transfer sales. They're persevering with it. Same at Hearts and Hibs, But I think you're right, Peter. I think if you appeal to managers, they have to look after their own interests, and I get that because they'll be sacked.
Yes.
But the other argument is, that's saying, well, if you play kids, it's going to be to the detriment of your team. If the kids are good enough, it isn't.
Yes, and that goes back to which I think is the core issue of this. And Tam is an SFA coach, Tam McManus, and he continually would say to us at the Braidhurst FA school that they want people to be expansive, use their skills, go and take people on. We just don't have enough of them. We don't have the technical ability to take the ball. And again, it's difficult because some people might accuse us because we're of a certain age to harp back about people, but you can only talk about what you know. Paul McStay, Ian Durrant, these people were breaking into the young Scotland teams at every level, and they were ahead of their time. And, I think the funniest story was, Andy Walker told a great story, which always stuck in my head, which was he was making his debut for Celtic, and Paul McStay was asking for the ball, and he said there was 3 people around him. He said, there's no way I'm giving him the ball. He says, so I come off at half time, you know, and he says, thinking, oh, made my debut for Celtic, this is fantastic. He says, and Billy McNeil ripped my head off. And he said, well, I can't pass it to him. He's got 3 people around him. And McNeil shouted at him, and Paul McStay's nickname used to be the Hat. And he says, if the Hat wants it, you give him it. Now, knowing Andy as I do, Andy's got a real twisted attitude to these things. So he said to me, as soon as I get the ball in the second half, he says, I fired it at him. He says, and I fired it at him at a point where I thought to myself, here, you have it. Let's see what Billy does now. He says, and within an instant, McStay had controlled it, beat 3 men, and done his usual with a pass. That was second nature to us with players, with that skill factor. It's not as much now. We're raving if somebody goes past a man.
Well, there's 2 points to that. Technically, I go to a lot of underage games and B games. In fact, I would see much more of that than I would live of the Premiership. And there's lots of skillful players about. There really are. You know, if you watch it, I watch, you know...
Skillful players at a certain level.
Yeah, under 7, they've got skill, they've got technique, and they're really well coached. And I think back, admittedly, a long time to my days, and I say, oh, well, you know, the technique is still there. They're better coached. But the problem with them being better coached is that the whole point of the game now, and one of the principles of the game, is to keep possession. So what you would find, for me, of a man of a certain age, is what I call wingers checking out. You know, the amount of times I see a winger checking out, like going on 1-on-1 with a guy, and then going down and doing the horseshoe again, is more a default. Whereas in my day, the default would be, you just beat that guy. And now, the problem with that is if you do it statistically, I was talking to Hibs and McGeady about this once, and he was talking about Tommy Burns to him. And Tommy Burns had a certain system with, and he says, don't want you ever lose a ball in our final third. Play it as safe as you want. I'll be pretty unhappy if you lose the ball in the middle third of the park. He says, but see in the final third of the park, lose the ball as often as you want. I don't care if you go against the fullback, just take him. And Aidan says, even the best fullback, or the best one, you're going to lose the ball. I mean, Ronaldo's going to lose the ball if he does that. Yeah. He said, but the whole impetus in the final third was to go and beat a man. You watch any game in the Premiership now, in fact, in the games that I go to, it's very rare to see a guy who's isolated a player. I'm not even talking about midfield, where we were brought up and guys beating people, but I'm talking about isolated wings. It's very rare to see somebody say, that'll go.
But you've got to try and offer a balance, Michael, and I think we've got to be fair about it, because you can't just beat the SFA over the head and then, you know, all of them, you know, on the basis that there are good things that are happening. There are good things. So the balance here, you know, quite simply is, I went up to Dundee and had a sports chat with Stephen Presley and assembled members of Dundee fans. And I was keen to ask Stephen, you know, what's your attitude to it? Like, for example, last season, Cammy Congreve, and he said, you know, that ball goes up to him. I want him to be the man that takes on a player.
He's doing the same with Bevan at the moment.
Yeah, and so you've got to be fair and say some managers do want that ability of the player to shine. I give you Jens Bertholascu, and I don't mean to bleat on about him as if he's some kind of messiah, but his point was, you're going to make a mistake, I'm not going to beat you over the head about it. His ethos was, let's take the ball and be brave in difficult situations, but I want you to be creative and expansive. Now that has to be celebrated.
Of course it has, yeah, but Hugh's right. I mean, I think risk-taking is coached out of kids in Scotland, you know, and maybe not only in Scotland. England have had this debate as well. And then England kind of addressed it, and they began to create guys like Foden and Cole Palmer, and kind of, they prioritised almost number 10s, you know. But I think you're right, and I've seen a lot of games when my boys were playing. I saw a lot of games at that level as well. And you're right, there was talented players, but there was almost one way of playing, really, you know. And I think it is, people will maybe roll their eyes at this, but it does get tied into the fact that kids don't just play themselves. Any football that kids play these days in Scotland is organised football.
Yes.
It's club football, you know, or boys' club football.
And there was a restriction at one point where the clubs in the Premiership and lower leagues would shore them up for their teams and then saying you can't play for anybody else in the afternoon or
No,
in the morning.
but I just mean that fundamentally kids don't just take a ball and go out and play it.
Yeah.
I mean, you might see it, but it's very rare. I mean, we live not far from each other. You don't see kids out just with a ball just playing in the way that you used to. And this is an old argument, but it's still relevant that the climate is terrible and kids have got other attractions here. And Scotland is fundamentally not that healthy a country. I mean, we know the issues that we've got as a society. So all of that ties into how many kids are in the broader pool to draw from. And that's probably quite narrow, really. And then you're trying to get the ones through that are going to be elite.
Well, can I ask you this something? How do you square that argument up with decades where, you know, I was looking at old pictures of Denis Law winning the Ballon d'Or in 1964. You go, as Hugh mentioned, 62 Dundee in the semi-finals of the European Cup. You go on from 60s to the 70s to the 80s, where you had creative, technically gifted players in the climate that we've always had, on pitches that weren't that great and certainly not to the standard they are now.
But kids were playing football
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
That's what they did, you know.
And that was only what they did.
That's only what they did.
And the other thing as well was as a working class culture, football was it. I mean, we can remember, I certainly remember going to school and I laugh at the generation, and I think it's terrific that, you know, if you've got, I'm in the realm of grandchildren, and they've got 4 or 5 sports to pick from every week. And they're again middle class, they're not working class. I think in our day it was just football. You were good at football, you were a good sportsman. You might get a run at cross-country run once a year at school sports days, but it was football. Another thing was that there was a great, there was literally a hunger about footballers in those days because it was a way out for many people. If we're talking about the football greats of when we were producing literally world-class players, where were we producing them from? We're producing them from Milton, Postle. Denis Law came from an impoverished fisherman's family. Denis Law is his biography, the first few chapters are amazing for the way some days they just weren't eating right, you know. And if you go in the whole great gamut of great players that came from this area where we're sitting now, Lanarkshire, you know, the Bells Hill hub,
yes.
maternity hub,
View Park,
various places, Edelwoods, and that. I mean, it was just pouring out players because that's all you could do, and that's what you did. And one of the things as well is before you even got, certainly in my lifetime, before you got anywhere near anybody who was coaching you, you'd played thousands of hours passing the ball, tackling, hitting balls coming off your head. And it was a given that you...
And then decades later, that was talked about as being the 10,000 hour things. I mean, kids had the 10,000 hours.
I mean, you were playing it, and that is lost, and for some very good reasons it's lost, and some nice reasons. You know, kids have got more choice of what they can do. But for very poor reasons, because football has become a game now, to access it, generally you have to pay money.
When you get to a situation, and again, you know, the English did address it because they really ploughed a lot of money into grassroots and the academy system, and they may well have, and I'm speaking from not having a great knowledge of what their structure was on how they were going to be coached, but they've certainly managed to bring through a hell of a lot of, you know, good English players who got to the semi-finals of a World Cup, a final of a European Championship. So they're doing something right, and they're creating those players. But we are in a situation where, and it's not going back to the olden days, but we're in a situation where if you want to play 5-a-sides or play with your mates or play 11-a-sides or play it. You're right, it is all structured. If I was going, I said, let's go and kick a ball right now. Before where Gary McAllister went to school, Keir Hardy, we could jump onto the top of the green electricity box and then go right onto the park at Keir Hardy, and we'd suddenly get the jerseys down and we're off and running. Now, I'd need 2 members of the SAS to scale the 8.5-foot fence to try and even get in it, and then lo and behold, somebody would say you're trespassing in the school grounds. Do you know what I mean? So is there a need, for the SFA to look and say we've got to work out a way, like the Australian method, which is sport is everything. We've got to look to work with the government and say, can we expand and get as many areas open again to people where they can just go and play for nothing? Because playing for nothing and access to it is the key.
They are trying, aren't they? I mean, they've talked about opening up school facilities and, school pitches at the weekends and evenings and so on. And Mike Mulroney's got that facilities drive, is it pitching in? It's called about facilities. 100 million. It was 50 million now. It's risen to 100 million fundraising thing. But to go back to what we mentioned earlier, England do value their national team. All the clubs. Okay, there's maybe slight tension at some point, but fundamentally, they value their national team, and so do the likes of Norway. Norway went through this kind of hand wringing about 15 years ago, when their domestic game was poor and they weren't developing much. Okay, Haaland's helped them, but they committed to trying to improve youth development in Norway. Croatia, we know, prioritise their national team. We don't really, or the major clubs don't. There's that kind of lack of shared objective.
Even at the top,
holds us back, and it'll hold back this summit as well.
Because when you look at it, it's an SFA summit, right?
Yeah.
And what power is the SFA over clubs? None at all. It's basically the clubs look at the SFA with some askance, shall we say, fair enough, they do the administration, supply the refs,
hand out the fines.
But they wouldn't look at them as a power to be adhered to. And I think that, certain things at the SFA go under the radar, and I think this Mike Mulroney thing's a very good thing. And it has been taken on, and I was at Castlemalton Saturday they've got what I would call a junior team for the first time. They've got a team in the West of Scotland League, Division 4, and the guys they were telling us that at night, what they do is it's a beautiful facility. It's cost £1.5 million to set up, beautiful changing rooms, good 4G pitch, and they leave it open at night. And 2 dog walkers come round just when dusk is falling and say to the Wains, right, you've got 20 minutes, next goal the winner, kind of thing. And then the kids go and they lock it up. So they've got a lot of kids in Castlemalton. And see that, I'm sitting listening to a guy and I say, well, that was what we were like when we were boys.
Yeah.
And more importantly, that's what Kenny Dalglish was like, or John Watt, or Kenny Burns, or John Robertson, or, that's the way they played football. They didn't, they weren't going along with their shin guards at 7 or 8 to some community centre. I don't want to be dismissive of that, because I think there's good estimate, but that ability to just A, play for fun, B, learn how to play football by experience. Watching the way a ball bounces, watching the way a guy comes in. Oh, if a guy comes in like that and I just stop and go like that, that kind of stuff inherently is gone.
Although I would say this, and we have produced unbelievably skillful players, and I've been lucky enough when we had the ability to, in the commercial radio stations, which is no longer the case now, commentate on 1,000,001 games. I watched James McFadden against Livingston one day take the ball on the halfway line, beat 6 players and put the ball in the back of the net. Now I play 6-a-sides with a whole group of ex-professionals, and McGeady is just outrageous. And he's at that level, and then you've got all the other ex-pros, and you're looking at them and you're thinking the levels of them and their skill factor is phenomenal, and it's a joy to actually play with them. But the ethos of those guys was skill. And I remember saying to David Moyes, what's the problem with Faddy at Everton? And he said, well, he's just a maverick. You know, he can go in the middle of the park and beat somebody. He says, and then we're all rushing forward. He says, and then he loses the ball. He says, and then all of a sudden I've got 8 players having to go back the way. You know, so in our day, when we were producing lots of them, you know, when you talk about your Jimmy Johnsons and all these people, they did have a form of coaching which was, yes, be expansive. Jimmy Johnson knew when to cross the ball. Willie Henderson knew. John Robertson knew for Nottingham Forest. They knew how to beat a man, but they knew the end product had to be there. My only problem with this situation, and Motherwell bucked the trend last season, is my only problem with it is you automatically have managers who are in there saying to themselves, I need to avoid defeat. That's the first thing. I need to avoid defeat to stay in this league. I want to keep my job longer than a year. And I know that this whole structure and the way the whole thing's formulated now, I might have to change the entire team season to season because players get cherry-picked and everything. And they automatically think, let's go for a draw. Let's try and have a hit against Celtic, you know, and it's a hit for nothing, a hit against Rangers for nothing. But where Motherwell bucked the trend is they thought, go and be brave. Go and, you will put players in, go and be brave and try and play the expansive football. And the evidence of playing expansive football and getting creative players and players that will beat a man, players that will take a ball in difficult situations, is the fans came back. And they started buying season tickets. And they embraced it. And Falkirk equally so. We're suddenly a Falkirk team that we were all tipping for going straight back down, suddenly had a Calvin Miller, suddenly had a Barney Stewart. You know, at one point, and I did this last year because I thought to myself, I'm going to look at it. And about in the final quarter, I went to a game on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday, I sat down at night, and I remember clearly looking through all the starting 11, and I'd worked out there were 45 Scottish players started in all 6 Premier matches. And of the 45, 9 of them started for Falkirk. The rest of them were either players that were at the twilight of their career, but very few young Scottish players. And that's why this guy here is called the Summit.
Yeah, and I think the numbers were lower at the first 2 weekends of this season.
Yeah.
It wasn't, when you say 42?
45.
45.
45 in the last quarter. Motherwell had 6 academy players on their bench last week. I spoke to David Clarkson at Motherwell prior to about 24 hours before they were playing a Scottish Premiership game, either last week or the week before. And he says, it's great. The managers come in following Jens Bertolaskau and said, you know, what have you got? We're going to give them a chance to come and play. He says, I've got a couple who've managed to get in there and get a little sniff, maybe not the start, but I've got, he says, we've had 6 academy players, we've got good players in our academy as well. He said that are there and they can see a pathway. And that is what you've got to see. You've got to think to yourself, here's the opportunity. And the big worry for us is there enough of them to allow us to get them playing regularly 50, Mark Botta mentioned it, 50, 100, 150 games.
Yeah, but I mean, last year Motherwell sold Lennon Miller for whatever, 5 million or something like that?
Yeah.
Club record at the time anyway. That is what encourages a chairman to go, or owners, I know they're fan owned, but to go, right, there is merit in this. It's not just a romantic, nice thing to do, and for, you know, a kind of abstract thing almost for the Scotland team down the years. This is for the here and now. We can benefit from this, you know. 5 or 6 million for Motherwell is significant. They've just done it again with Just, obviously, but Lennon Miller was theirs, and that encourages them to do it. And I think that's what Craig Mulholland and Maxwell will be trying to drum into them. That don't see this as some thing that is kind of, you know, for the benefit of the Scotland team, rather than you guys. It can work for you guys too.
I think the other thing that's clouding our issue with the Scotland team is, and no disrespect to him, because he fulfilled the remit, Steve Clarke. I think you've got to be fair to the man. He fulfilled the remit, had a lovely group of players that suddenly were playing top flight football in a number of leagues. And he managed to get them to the point of, what's your remit? Get us to the finals. And he did that. They played good football against Spain. They shocked everybody with the Denmark, albeit against 10 men. But they still had some highs along the way. But too many of them at major tournaments were lows. And I wonder if a more expansive thinking manager might have changed our ethos and our viewpoint and our criticism if he'd been more expansive at the major tournaments. I don't know. You know, I'm looking at it, I'm saying to myself, here, we're trying to solve it in, 55 minutes in the programme? You know, what is the objective of the summit? To tell everybody, look, bide your time, can you do this at grassroots level? Because that doesn't solve the problem that most of our teams will be pumped out of Europe by the end of September.
We need an attitude change. I mean, Craig Mulholland has to kind of cajole and persuade chairmen and owners. As you said earlier on, the SFA are relatively powerless in this. I mean, they can't wield a gun against the clubs and say, right, we're imposing a rule that you have to play an under-21 team. They tried it, and it didn't work. There was too much resistance to it. Remember, it was about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, that the quota thing was tried. Sitting here, we probably all think that was a good idea. You know, it forces clubs to, but they resisted it. You know, managers resisted it, and eventually chairmen resisted it.
It comes down though. If you know, see, like there'll be a lot of talk about this and schemes and pathways and attitudes and things, but it comes down to the fact, like, as I say, I watch a lot of young football, watch even Scotland under-19s and all that. And, you know, Rangers B teams, Celtic B teams, and you look at, see Rangers, I think they've got a really good young midfielder in McCallion. You know, every time I've watched him, he's really technically good. Another boy, Kyle Glasgow, right? And now if you're, and Kyle Glasgow's only 16 or 17, but he's a good wide player. If you're saying to Derek McInnes, I don't want you to sign this $6 million guy for Feyenoord, and see Cammy Devlin, get him to. And we'll play our own guy, McCallion, in it, and we'll play. I'm exaggerating to make a point. No chance. Celtic, the two guys that have impressed me with Celtic, you know, a young boy McCardle that plays in midfield, and the boy Hatton, who's had a wee sniff at it. Both McCardle and Hatton have had a sniff.
They took him on against Milan, was it?
Yeah. But you look at that and say, well, what's the news this week? The news this week is that Celtic are playing probably a number 10/number 9 as a winger because he's technically very good and they paid a lot of money, and they're bringing in another winger for X million of pounds. So, Mr. Hatton, you're going to be limited, and in midfield, McCardle, you're going to be up against X, Y, Z, and that is the nub of it, Peter. That's the nub of it. It's when big behemoths and all the teams in their own way are that, push comes to shove, they're more likely to go with experience, physical strength and age over giving youth a chance. And
I'm very wary of the fact that while we are trying to work out what they hope to achieve, what their objective is, I mean, some people will turn around and probably criticise me and say, what are you bleating on about the size of a league for and the structure of it? Maybe it's just about they want to try, maybe the objective is how do we get more Scottish players playing football the right way. But I don't think it's as simple as that, which is why I threw in the structure of the top league. If, as Hugh's saying there, you're right, big clubs suddenly have different ambitions, and that's why they're spending 8-9 million on Hasim Hassan. That's why they're Drioch's coming into Rangers. That's why they've got an expectation from their fan base to try and do something in Europe. Well, with all due respect, it's not working. Because for 20 years, Celtic's strategy has not been very, very good in the Champions League. And Rangers have managed to keep the coefficient going because they have managed to get to 2 European finals and have managed to take a good few scalps along the way.
In the Europa League, though.
In the Europa League, I get that, Hugh. And I mean, look at you're talking about players that are coming through, McCallion, but Lowry was one at Rangers, never get a sniff, and everybody was talking about him. They never get a sniff. But I still think that it's not going to be as simple as everybody traps up. Let's just say all 42 clubs send their guy, whoever they send. They all sit down with Craig Mulholland and Ian Maxwell. What's the opening gambit? What's the opening gambit? What's the opening line to say, we're all here to do what? To tell you to start playing youngsters, to tell you that we're going to put an incentive in if you play 3 youngsters. If they get more minutes, then you'll get a reward. What is the incentive? And then what becomes the destructive nature of it, where the 42 clubs say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to get sacked. Because that's why I put in 16 to 18
Well, the
clubs.
managers will say that.
Yeah.
The chairman and the chief executives might have a different view on it. I mean, some of them... I mean, Rangers made noises earlier in the year about wanting to get more of a Scottish core into the team, and they've signed Shankland and McCrory. But whether these guys... Even Shankland is not a guaranteed starter, and McCrory certainly isn't. But I guess that ties into how many Scottish players are out there that are affordable that would make them any better. You know?
I think it's also when you talk about strategies and plans. I think the word's priority, right? Now we're sitting and we're devoting a lot of time to this, quite rightly, I think, on the future of Scottish football, and we're pinning it on how do we bring kids through. But do you think in the bowels of Ibrox this afternoon that Gilmer and others are saying, do you know what? We've got to bring our priority. We'll have to bring youngsters. You think Michael Nicholson, wrangling over with Paderborn over a transfer? Do you know what my priority is today? Is hold the bus, hold on my calls. How do I get Hatton into the first team?
What they used to do though, Hugh, which was a situation where you had a game where the team is winning, and they're cruising, and you name any manager from Aberdeen to Dundee United to ever suddenly would throw on a youngster and say, here, you have the last 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, the financial advantage, I mean, it's not all about Rangers and Celtic, because, I mean, say if Rangers and Celtic never played a Scottish player, those Scottish players could still come through all the other clubs,
Yes.
So it's not unique to them. But you look at Rangers and Celtic, I think by and large, they win the majority of their matches. They do. I mean, you can laugh at Rangers never winning the league for 14 out of 15 years, but they're fundamentally, they're successful at winning matches in Scotland up to a point.
Yes.
So that goes with your point that if they are 3 or 4, like Kilmarnock, Celtic are 5-1 up against Kilmarnock, that's an opportunity. But we're going back to the issue that we started with, that the Old Firm and to a degree Aberdeen, Hearts, Hibs will resist this, because they can't have it forced on them. It needs to be a kind of attitudinal change, or look at, and this is again, it's an old one, but look at what Ajax do, and look at what Club Brugge and other clubs that have Bodo Glimt,
Lots of Bodo Glimt players come from that country.
Yeah, exactly. And these clubs are doing more in Europe than the Old Firm are, or certainly any of the others as well. So I say again, I think Craig Mulholland's got his work cut out, and he knows that.
See, if you go on the September 4th, let's just say the SFA suddenly say to you on September 4th, we've had this summit, we're now going to have a press conference. You're going to, as a journalist, thinking, right, I need the line out of this. What line are you hoping for, realising that they're going to a summit?
What line am I hoping for as a journalist or as a fan? Because that's two different things, really.
No, because the objective is I've got 42 clubs in here, and we're having a summit on how we get more Scottish players playing, regular football at a level, top level first, bottom, going down through the leagues, and then the results, ultimately, the results will ripple through the European performances and also at international level. What are you expecting from these guys to come out and say?
Well, that's a different question. What I'm asking and what I'm expecting them to say, but I would ask them, what do you think that achieved? What did you hear from the major clubs that made you think anything's going to change? And what promises or incentives were you able to give them to make a change? We know what will make a difference. Giving kids more minutes. I think we're clear now, aren't we? That transition phase 2 years report 2 years ago was really good. It showed that we're miles off it in terms of the amount of minutes that kids play in Scotland, and these are the minutes that they need to be playing football to
at that age as
at
well.
that age, And we see it with the one that always stays in my head is Lewis Ferguson, who played millions of games for Hamilton and then for Aberdeen, and look at his career that he's going on to have. Whereas there's 100 other guys maybe not of that ability, or were at the wrong club, or a bigger club than Hamilton in those years.
I give you Jake Hasty. 20 games, some of them as substitute for Motherwell, moves to Rangers,
Yeah, exactly. So, and you know, there's scores of these kids just kind of disappear or go down the league or they go to England, and we know that's another issue, by the way, that talented Scottish boys are being picked off to kind of pad out squads in England, not to their benefit either.
Yeah.
Not to the boys' benefits, you know.
And again, this is why I think you're right about Craig Mulholland and Ian Maxwell and a number of the clubs who will have legitimate arguments, is quite simply that you also have in the equation, well, I've got a promising player, but I've also got his mum and dad and an agent saying, take the $7,000, sit in the Chelsea academy.
Of course,
Islam
It's a hard one,
Farouz,
that. It's a hard one.
I mean, you're saying
Karamoko Dembele.
But that is one thing that the SFA could do, is they could go to FIFA, and there's already moves to do this, go to FIFA and say, listen, this is just not a Scottish problem, but we're now facing the fact that a lot of academies are just going to say, why do we bother? So if we want to keep this academy system going, we're going to have tougher registrations, and we're going to have tougher and more expensive transition payments. And that's got to be embedded in the game. And SFA could be part of that movement, because that is going to that's going to have to be done, because there's two problems. Yeah, players are not getting minutes, but otherwise players are moving, you know, and good players as well at a decent age, and they are just going to pad squads. They're not being cherry picked because they're the next Lionel Messi. They'll all be talented, of course, but we've seen so many leave over the years, and for the parents and the kid, it's a no-brainer. I mean, Gannon Doak's going on to be an international player and subject of a 20 million plus transfer. But the problem with him is not getting minutes at Celtic. I mean, he was going to get minutes at Celtic. He was brought on in a Rangers match, you know, to say to him, listen, son, you stay about here. But if Jurgen Klopp wants you at Liverpool, plus they're weighing in with, well, they're weighing in obviously with 5 figures a week at least, 10 grand at least a week, with the promise that within 2 years, if you do all right, son, it's Premier League wages. That's irresistible. It doesn't matter who you are, it's irresistible.
We can't sit here on a sofa and say, oh, well, you should be turning that down.
No, exactly.
That could be transformational for a family, you know, but in terms of what it means for youth development, it's detrimental, because and a guy like Gannon Doak, sadly, because he succeeds, others go, well, I could be him, you know, and they have to have a bit of belief about themselves, don't they? They all have a bit of belief that I can make it. I mean,
but that's the thing. I always remember the late and great Liam Miller when he went to Manchester United. I would say, oh, I'll never get a game with Manchester. I think Liam Miller, God rest him, was sitting there and said, oh, I'm not going to turn down Manchester United because I don't think I'm good enough. Of course he's got it in his... that's in their makeup. Let's go to a bigger league. You see it. The whole progression of football from kids when they're playing young is to go... It's go up a level, up a level, up a level.
Yeah.
I think the only way out is, improve hours in participation time. I think it's protect academies by registrations. I don't think... it's not practical. I'd love to see it, but it's not practical to force clubs to play players. That's not happening.
And again, I'd love them to say, right, here's the 10 points we discussed. Here's what we were trying to do. Here's the objective we set out. Yes, the core issue is how do we get more Scottish players playing? What are we coaching them? What are we coaching them technically that there's a drop-off, that they can't force their way in? Why have we not got enough good enough players? Mm-hmm. And then over and above that, do we need to look at the structure of the game that gives managers the freedom to say, I'm going to take a chance on these players and play them? And then obviously, I still think the ultimate thing is there's a responsibility of managers and clubs to say, play with that freedom. Try and replicate a Motherwell and a Falkirk and go out and entertain. And Motherwell weren't the most gifted group of players that Scotland had seen. It was just about the fact that they were brave enough to say this is the way you want you to play. But the other thing I think as well as getting lots of good players, more of them technically gifted, and a bigger pool to choose from, is I think our game will only benefit if we expand that league and discuss with the broadcasters we need to change so that we get something long-term out of this.
I think the depressing thing about this is that we could have had this conversation. To be fair, we have had this conversation 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years, and all these issues. You know, with all due respect, we haven't really said anything that isn't well known and well trodden ground. You know, what was different this summer? Of course, we were at the World Cup for the first time in 28 years, and I don't know about you, but I mean, it was a reminder to me that nothing is bigger in Scottish football. I mean, we know the Old Firm are big, and we get that. But nothing is bigger than the country qualifying for the World Cup and competing at the World Cup. You just saw the way that people mobilise, and there was so much attention about the kick-offs and where you're going to watch a game and where you're going to go, where you're going to watch it with pals, all that sort of stuff. That kind of energy, and it continued built for weeks, you know, and I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. Did it not help that we watched small countries that had the population of Glasgow suddenly produce performances that we craved?
Yeah, exactly. But Scotland do this thing where somebody does well and we go, oh, we need to go and copy what they do. And like at the moment, there's a bit of Norway chat, right? But Norway didn't qualify for 28 years or something.
I'm old enough to remember the Iceland chat.
Iceland, yeah.
I'm old enough to remember Rinus Mikkels' chat.
Oh, of course.
But Rinus Mikkels' chat, for me, is Rinus Mikkels' chat wasn't anything that we didn't know already, because prior to Dutch and total football, Scottish clubs had created that in the 60s.
I know. Where do you think Rinus Mikkels got it from?
Yeah, exactly. This is what I'm saying. You know, we did have the blueprint.
Yeah.
We just constantly ripped it up.
Right.
Because we eventually got to 19, and I give you this as one of the reasons why there's no pathway for people to say, I want to stay in Scotland. In 1975, they changed the league to 10 teams, and they've had a different mashup of that constantly. It doesn't lend itself to people thinking, I'm going to break in. You know, I just think no matter what Craig Mulholland says and Ian Maxwell says, you can create as many of them as possible. But if you have clubs who say we've got to stay in the league, we're not taking a risk. We're not going to play.
That's the issue, and I think that needs to be the kind of core motivation of the meeting, really. I think everybody that sits in that room knows the issues and knows probably the solutions, but it's about how you apply them.
Yeah, and another thing is that radical change, like changing the leagues, is just not on. It's just not going to happen.
Do you think that will be discussed, or is that?
Oh, I think it'll be discussed.
Yeah.
But and it should be discussed, but it's just not going to happen because it's vested interest. You know, see, we're talking about been discussing this for 20 years, and that it is. The only recent development has been the drain on academies. That's the only really recent development.
There's not a great success rate from the academies, Hugh.
But yes, but you say that, but you know, most of Scottish football is populated by academy players. You know, is that a success that they're actually getting a game? You know, if you go to most games, I mean, they're not plucking them out the juniors to put them in the Premiership. They're coming, you know, if they're Scottish, in fact, if they're English or British in any way, they probably come through an academy system, because that's the only pathway now. I mean, you know, you're not going to a welfare game or a junior game on a Saturday and picking up an Eddie McGeady, or, you know, you're going to watch Drumchapel and, you know.
Yeah, picking up a Steve Archibald. But my point here is, if you're saying, yeah, the academy is giving people a professional life, I'm saying, well, if they're coming out of the academy, they're not getting to the elite, to the top end of it and playing regularly.
And I do think that, I mean, this whole debate, this whole issue, A, it's not going away, B, it'll intensify again, because you look beyond this current crop of Scotland, this backbone of the Scotland team, you know, Robertson, McTominay, McGinn, Christie, all these boys, a lot of them are coming at the end in a kind of cycle at the same time. And you look beyond that and what's coming through, and okay, there's half a dozen names, Gannon Doak, maybe Tyler Fletcher. It was nice writing about Robbie Ewer yesterday, he could be interesting. Hickey's still young, Gilmore's 25. But, I I mean, that, you know, there's not a lot there. That's what did I just say? Half a dozen names. Where's the rest? You know, where's the depth beyond that?
Yeah.
And that's why we're going to be having this debate and for years to come. And I'm not sure the solutions will be in that summit, sadly.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what the points that come out of it. You can give us your thoughts on it from grassroots all the way through to the elite end of Scottish football. You can look at the performances, you can look at the success rate, you can look at the success rate of players coming from academies and eventually playing football and having a career and contributing to our international performances as well. Maybe you want to look at the managers and how they're coaching their players and the opportunities. Give us your thoughts on it as well. It's one of these topics that gets everybody, gets their back up first of all and then gets them typing and writing in. Give us it in the comments section, email us, download the app, you can contact us directly as well. But it's interesting. Just before we go, a couple of quick points I wanted to get your thoughts on. Andrew McKinlay stepping down as Hearts CEO. He's the SFA Vice President. I get a feeling, having spoken to a number of Hearts fans, that are far from happy with his conduct and commitment to their cause last season and a number of issues that they had with regards to the way they were treated by officials and eventually the loss of the league. And they strongly feel that Andrew McKinlay was compromised and should have fought their case harder.
You can see that point of view. I don't think it would have made any difference if the Genghis Khan fighting their case, because what were they going to get out of it? You know, there's, you know, if you talk about the specific incidents, are they arguing over a penalty and arguing over a non-penalty? No matter how much you argue that, you're not going to change that. Truncated match at
Celtic Park, yep.
That was the SPFL and SFA moved very quickly that day. Some would seem almost indecent haste to say that yes, the referee there can be no debate about this because the match was officially ended, etc. I think they'll have Andrew McKinlay very much in their sights. I think it's more of a, if I was looking at him, I think, and I said this at the beginning of the last season and got slaughtered for it, that the first season under Jamestown wouldn't be the season. Everybody's talking about when Hearts were doing well. Oh, it's a Jamestown thing. It wasn't. It was a very basic Scottish football thing. Hearts weren't playing, you know, ASCII football or, you know, some revolutionary football. And they weren't even using revolutionary analytics. If you look at, you know, a lot of the players at Jamestown, they didn't get minutes, etc. And I think that Andrew McKinlay is just paid the price really for an acceleration in Hearts' business model, what they want to do, how they want to go about it. I think, I'll be quite frank, I think the people at the top of Hearts will be much more comfortable than having a Rankin in charge and a McInnes in charge, because I think they'll look at him as being more allied to their principles.
Yep, okay, that's one aspect. Two other things before we go. Potential Scotland manager has to be someone who agrees with Craig Mulholland and Ian Maxwell on the ethos of how they want Scotland to play. Is it a Stevie Naismith? Is it a Casper Hjulmand? Is it someone else out there that we haven't thought about? Because not many names are springing to mind.
No, not many names are springing to mind. And when do we play again? End of September, Nations League. I wouldn't entirely rule out them having Naismith as caretaker manager for those. I don't think anything is imminent. My hunch would be it's going to be an overseas manager. I mean, I don't think that's revelatory. There's not a great field of candidates from Scotland. They might go to about £1 million salary. That's high for the SFA. It's not high in world football. So that limits your pool.
Yeah, and last point, Hugh, which goes back to, again, this recurring theme that we will be coming back to in the Journos, which is the performance of Scottish clubs in Europe. Of the teams that are playing, Rangers against Jagiellonia Białystok, Hearts against Benfica, Motherwell HJK, and of course Hibs are in North Macedonia against Skendia.
Yep. I think there's reasonable prospects for Hibs and Motherwell. Motherwell got a very good result away from home. I think Hibs stuttered over the line, but you would expect them to, another week in their legs, etc., etc. The huge game at Ibrox now takes on massive proportions in terms of perception and
How many are making it?
I think right. I think Motherwell will make it, and I think Hibs will make it, and I think Rangers will make it.
Okay, you've gone 3. We know Hearts are out of it. I'm going 2.
Hearts are out of it. Are they writing Hearts off? Are you?
Yes.
Well, I think Hearts. What I will say, Hearts, the next goal is crucial.
And I hope the referee doesn't end it prematurely.
Hearts' objective is keeping it in single figures aggregate.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
And again, we're not. I know somebody will complain because we're laughing about it, but we're laughing about the sad situation that Hearts have been absolutely spanked by Benfica, as quite a lot of clubs would. I think Motherwell will make it, and I think Rangers will make it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I would agree with. I think Rangers will make it, but I wouldn't put a mortgage on. I wouldn't put a fiver on any of them. To be honest with you,
No.
I think we've seen this movie umpteen times when Scottish teams. You think they're there and it slips away. Hibs needed a last minute goal to beat Scandinavia, and now they're going over there, and it's not the conditions, the heat, not going to be great. They'll do well. They played well at Ibrox though, and they defended well at Ibrox. So it could be 3 out of 3. Sorry, 3 out of 4. But I know you're sitting on the fit. I think Rangers and I kind of worry about Motherwell.
HJK are a good side.
I kind of worry about Motherwell a wee bit.
You're going 1 out of 4?
No, I think Hibs. I'm going to go Hibs and Rangers.
Brilliant. Okay. Listen, just before we go, we were talking about kids getting the chance to play. What about kids, boys and girls, getting the chance to have a new squad kit? Here's the details in our fabulous free-to-enter Hummel kit competition.
Hummel. Let's play.
How would you like to win a full Hummel team kit for your boys or girls team? Well, you can in our fabulous competition, and it's absolutely free to enter. PLZ Soccer and Hummel have teamed up together to give you the chance to win the full kit. And here's how easy it is to enter. Entry is completely free. Simply click the link below and enter using one verified email address. One lucky team will win a full Hummel kit for 16 players, including shirts, shorts and socks. Terms and conditions apply, so don't miss out. Enter today. Now, I have to be honest with you, Hugh, that would have been great in the 1970s, because all I wanted when I was a kid was to get the Ajax kit. But you couldn't buy it anywhere in shops at that time. But, you'd love to have a full kit and run out, wouldn't you? That's not a bad...
One of the things I did once was hand over a match-worn Ajax European Cup Winners' Cup final strip to my son, and the guy who was playing it had been playing in the front three of Van Basten, Bergkamp and Ali Dick.
Yes.
And Ali Dick was is a friend of mine, but my great friend, the brother of a great friend, and he came round one day and said, a big black bag, would your laddie like any of this? Vintage.
I mean, that's incredible,
Ajax,
isn't it?
so
And even we don't even actually celebrate the fact that Ali Dick would have played for Ajax.
I know, and by the way, to go back to the youth development, what a talent he was, Ali Dick. He was an exciting player, especially when he was younger, but he had a good career.
He had a great. I mean, people forget. He won 3 European medals. He won the FA Cup with Tottenham. He won the European Cup winners with Ajax, and whisper it, he won a European medal with the Scottish national team as well, the underage team, which had some fair talents in that team, including Mr. McStay.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we rave about the McStays and the Durants. and the McGeadys and people like that. We're going to be looking on with great interest to see what comes out of this and what the real objective and the points that they highlight, and we'll come back to it again and address it on the Journos programme. It's been an enjoyable programme. Thanks to Michael and Hugh and myself. If we missed something that you thought about, don't forget to put it in the comments section and we will address it again. But from the team here, thank you for listening, thank you for watching.